rally, its longest since 1996. When Europe opened on Monday, it was back in financial torment, with tiny Cyprus in the eye of the storm. A 10 billion euro bailout's been promised, but that's not what's triggered panic. Banks on the island are now closed until Thursday. On news, the president's agreed to raise an extra 7 billion with, most notably, an unprecedented tax on all bank deposits. Otherwise put, when those banks do eventually open, customers will be out of pocket by nearly 10% of their savings for those with more than 100,000 in their accounts. But even small-time savers will have to cough up. Anticipating a run on the banks, cash machines in Cyprus are now empty, enough to make financials forget one of the main reasons for Brussels' tough terms. Nicosia's lax banking rules that made its bloated financial sector a choice destination, most notably for recycling Russian money. How's Moscow going to react? Will Brussels go through with enforcing a tax on deposits? Will it trigger that run on the banks? And also kill painstaking efforts to build momentum for a Europe-wide banking union? Today in the France 24 debate, Cyprus's risky rescue. And in a short while, we'll be crossing over to correspondent Natalie Savarakis, who's in Nicosia. With us here in the studio, Ronald Freeman of the Atlantic Council. Welcome back, sir. Thank you. Also with us, he is a London-born Cypriot journalist who works in Paris, Andres Evagora.
Good evening.
And with us also, Gérard Ducilol of the Pro-Europe Thomas More Institute think tank. And he's definitely a man who sees the glass half full. His latest book is called La Crise Enfin, The Crisis at Last.
Thank you.
Welcome to the show. The France 24 debate, where you can always join the conversation on Facebook and Twitter, our hashtag F24debate. Cyprus's parliament was supposed to approve that bailout that had been fleshed out over the weekend this Monday. Now it looks like it's going to meet late on Tuesday. There's talk of backing off on a one-time levy on all savings accounts. For now, though, that's still very much on the books.
A drastic measure that had to be taken. Cyprus's president said he had no choice but to impose the levy on bank deposits.
This solution is certainly not the one we would have wanted, but it is the least painful under the circumstances, because above all, it leaves the operation of this country in our hands.
With Cyprus residents rushing to empty their accounts, many cash machines in the country were empty and banks blocked all transfers.
I came here to withdraw money, but all withdrawals have been blocked. The situation's tragic.
I feel like everyone, annoyed and angry at the situation we are facing. We have no idea what we will face tomorrow. All of this is really difficult.
The one-off tax was imposed as part of a 10 billion euro bailout from the EU, European Central Bank and IMF. Cypriots would have to pay a tax between 6.75% and 9.9% on their deposits. There are almost 70 billion euros in accounts held in Cyprus, a favored offshore tax haven for many foreigners. Nearly half belong to non-residents, most believed to be Russians, bringing the Kremlin to criticize the tax.
While assessing the proposed additional levy on bank accounts in Cyprus, Vladimir Putin said that such a decision, should it be made, would be unfair, unprofessional and dangerous.
Many politicians in Cyprus have also condemned the levy, raising questions about whether it will pass the required parliamentary vote.
All right, so that vote now due to take place sometime Tuesday afternoon. Natalie Savarakis is with us in Nicosia. That extra time for the vote for Parliament, does that mean that this is going to swing which way at this point?
No one really knows it, and all depends on the Eurogroup meeting today, where possibly we'll be reviewing this very controversial bailout, which has prompted such extreme feelings on this island, ranging from outright confusion on what this means, do we have money in our bank savings anymore, and anger towards the government, anger towards their European allies till not long ago. And of course, where are we headed now? What does this mean? Will the government actually stick by its deal, or can it actually have room to maneuver and renegotiate with its European partners, especially as the opposition grows back home, not only with the political parties, but especially with ordinary Cypriots.
Raising money on by putting this levy on bank deposits. Again, Natalie Severikis, this will mean that when the banks open, everyone's bank account will be that much lighter in cash?
Well, that's exactly what the government has been trying to safeguard, if you like, and that's why banks on this island will remain shut until Thursday. That's what we've been hearing from the Bank of Cyprus. But the ordinary Cypriots I've been talking to have essentially said that, yes, we are going to go to the banks and try to save any money we can. But of course, this is what the government itself is trying to avoid, the much feared bank run, which itself might propagate itself to other crisis-hit countries of the Eurozone.
Stay with us, Natalie, because I just want to put a question here to Andreas Evagora. Your family back home in Cyprus, what do you think their intentions will be come Thursday?
Well, Cyprus is a country of immigrants. There's not one person in Cyprus who doesn't have family abroad. And I'm convinced a vast majority of people, as soon as the banks open, I've spoken to people in Cyprus and in London, they're going to take this. They're going to take the hit. But as soon as they can, they'll get their money out of Cyprus, as anyone would do. That would seem like the prudent thing to do. It's a small country, but as I say, it's a nation where there's a lot of contacts internationally, and they will move their money out of Cyprus as soon as they possibly can. I agree with your correspondent. There's a lot of anger. I think people knew something quite bad was happening. A tipping point would come, but not quite to this extent. People are losing money that they thought was safe.
Natalie Severikis, is that what you've been hearing there in Nicosia?
Yes, absolutely. Many Cypriots are hoping they'll be able to withdraw their cash. They've also been outraged as rumors have been circulating that this was a plan that was well known to some political figures or even foreign dignitaries who have been able to withdraw their cash well before this huge catastrophe has hit the island. So let's see how the politicians maneuver and try to wiggle themselves out of this crisis and this imminent scandal that could break out. Of course, this is all rumor, but this has been enough to incense the Cypriots here.
All right, Natalie Severikis, thanks for that update from Nicosia. We'll be catching up with you, of course, in our news bulletins. I have a question. Gérald Ducilol, maybe you can answer it for me. Is it legal to tax bank deposits, especially, isn't there supposed to be an insurance mechanism in Europe where if you have less than 100,000 in the bank, that money is insured?
This money is insured. So it is insured, it is protected, so you will be reimbursed from your 100,000 euros. But the fact is that the government it's totally a discretionary decision from a government to raise taxes where it wants to raise taxes. You know, you could have taxes on income from deposit, and you have a wealth tax in some countries, as you know, in France. So it can be considered as a one-shot wealth tax on a purely legal point of view.
One shot. Will it be a one shot if it happens?
Have we ever seen a one-shot tax anywhere in the world in our lifetimes? Once they start, there's no end to it. Andreas has got his finger on it, and Natalie mentioned it in the program. After the smoke clears and the banks reopen, who's going to want to leave his money in those banks? And what happens in Portugal, Spain, Italy, other countries where people are concerned about the banks and fear that their authorities, their government leaders, I say, you know, that's a great idea those Cypriots have had. Let's grab some of the bank deposits here. A run on banks is the real danger that this little foray into expropriation has triggered. That's the thing to be afraid of.
It's clear that it's much easier to tax people because they can't move away from the country from one day to the other. The money can flow wherever you want to let it flow, you know. So I agree with
Ron Freeman.
Yeah, Ron Freeman, that there is a great risk that this money flew away from Cyprus. And this is when a bank run starts, the best thing you have to do is to go and take your money too, because it's very difficult to stop it. So there is a big risk taxing deposit lower than 100,000 euros.
All right. One of the board members of the European Central Bank, Germany's Roeg Asmussen, says if Cyprus's president wants to change something in the structure of the levy on bank deposits, that's in his hands. He must simply make sure the financing is intact. In other words, we need to get to that number of 17 billion euros 10 billion from Europe, 7 billion's got to come from Cyprus. Otherwise put, why didn't they just tax big depositors more and small depositors less?
Well, can we stop using the word tax? This gives tax a bad name. It's not a tax, it's not a levy, it's a theft. People are having their money stolen. There's many ways, and I'll leave the economic theory to your esteemed guests. And a comparison is with Microsoft. If Microsoft committed fraud or incompetence on a massive scale, would people who use Microsoft be taxed? Well, of course not. You tax the company, you punish the company. You don't punish its customers. So there are many different ways to raise this money. And perception is very important here. I mean, people are quite cynical in Cyprus. There's been a political elite that's been mistrusted for a long, long time. But as I said earlier, no one quite thought it would go this far. And there's a lot of anger now. And there is 2 days, things might change, but really it's 2 days just to persuade politicians to vote yes. That's why the vote wasn't taken today.
Gerard Isidore, why did the likes of Germany and Finland push for this? Why did they, when they knew it might trigger this kind of response? Or did they not think it would because Cyprus is such a small player inside the EU?
But you know, Germany is in a process of electoral process, and there is a lot of anger in Germany to pay for Mediterranean countries, because it was absolutely horrible to have a support from the European Union to support Greece, because they said, German people said they have cheated, they fraud the government, they don't pay the taxes, and why we German would pay again and again for people that are cheating. So we need to have these people making some efforts on their side in order for us to help them. That's the way they think. And as now we are, Mrs. Merkel is going to run for a next election. She doesn't want to generate angriness from the German population. So there is, the German population is really fairly hostile to this paying again for people that are not don't play the rules, because they don't play the rules.
Ronald Friedman?
François, any student of history knows that the law of unintended consequences has led to disaster again and again in Europe. I think we're seeing another event of that magnitude. This is a small drop in the water in terms of the size of Europe's economy, but it's a huge event in terms of the destruction of trust. Brussels has already stressed European
hindsight
trust.
being 2020, you're convinced the Germans and the Finns would not have gone along with this if they'd seen the unintended consequences.
Let's put it this way, Deutsche Bank's shares dropped as much as the banks of the Mediterranean countries, 3% today. Deutsche Bank is not that well capitalized either. If we start to see deposits flowing out of Deutsche Bank in the next few days, then we'll know that something is seriously going wrong.
But if a crime has been committed, again, why don't you just punish the people who've committed the crime? Punish, if there's been money laundering, well, there's a European police force for finance. Punish the people involved. Why are we punishing the majority of people who have simply earned their money and thought their savings?
Yes, but if you don't do that, you have to levy new taxes on the population. That's the other alternative you have. The European will not finance 100% of a bailout.
True,
they will need the local people to support.
If
part
someone
of
commits
that.
financial crime in Germany, in France, as has happened, is the whole population punished, or is the French bank punished?
It's not a question of punishment.
Well, the people are being punished in Cyprus.
Cyprus is not really a country. Cyprus is a banking system with a beach attached to it. It's a very, very unstable setup. There's an equivalent in Bermuda, where they have bet their economy on the insurance industry. Now, they do it, as far as I know, in a very clean way, but it is another form of tax avoidance of other countries. Tax avoidance is a strategy for countries that have no other strategy. And that's been Cyprus' strategy.
I'm appalled as anyone about what Cypriot banks have been up to, but
I'm not
surely
making a judgment,
we have to
Andreas.
separate.
It's not a judgment. It's just an observation.
It's an observation, but surely we have to separate banks that have committed crimes and the people, because we have no choice. We have to use a bank.
Here's the issue. It's the small saver and the big ones. When it's the small savers, you're describing it as theft. When it's just the big ones that are effective, it's what they call in financial terms a haircut, isn't it not?
Well, I know a lot about haircuts. Soaking the rich is a system that goes only to a certain level, and then the rich take the rest of their deposits out and never come back. That's a very expensive step.
All right. The Daily Telegraph, by the way, pointing the finger at your compatriots a little bit. A sunny place for shady people is how the newspaper depicts Cyprus, saying the former president the Soviet-trained leader of the nominally communist AKL party, was unwilling to introduce austerity measures. On the contrary, at one point he declared that he could not see the point of governments having surpluses. So that's one of the opinions that's been bandied about, and it's true that before 2004 you didn't even have a financial authority.
It's easy to be up on Cyprus. It's a small country, but let me tell you what people in Cyprus are saying. The head of the International Monetary Fund, Christine Lagarde, how much tax does she pay? 0. Now, people might say, well, it's different. It's a perception. She worked for an international law company for much of her career that specialises in tax avoidance for multinationals. So these are perhaps the reasons that the governments find that their coffers are empty. Now, again, we can argue and say, well, you know, she could maybe earn more in the private sector. But perceptions are very important. This is what people in Cyprus are saying now. The head of the International Monetary Fund pays no tax at all. And she's now telling us that we must lose 6% of our savings, most of which has been earned legally and through hard-working people. Sorry, but I think, honestly, that's the case.
You're certainly right. But this is the kind of concern, the kind of resentment that leads to political reaction to economic decisions. This is how, not to put too much of a dramatic cast on this, this is how a Hitler rises. He says, it's unfair. It's unfair. Those people are rich. We work hard. We're poor. It's unfair. We must do something. At some point, people react. It's a real danger.
So how should people react?
One thing that could have been done here and was not done was to say that the IMF is there for a purpose. It's to help countries in trouble. Christine Lagarde insisted, and the ECB backed her up, that the level of debt to GDP in Cyprus could not go above a certain percentage. Hence this need to take it away from the population. Now, in Italy, they took it away from bondholders, but there are no bondholders in Cyprus. So who's left? Depositors. So let's grab 7 billion euros from the depositors. That was a pis-aller, a worse case evil. And there was always the opportunity to say the IMF will go to 140% of GDP because Cyprus needs the money and there's nowhere else to get it from legally and ethically, and we'll just increase the debt and we'll make it long enough in maturity and low enough in interest rate. God knows interest rates are very low these days. So the Cypriots have a chance in the fullness of time, after a generation or two, actually to pay it back. That would have been the classic way to go. Right. Setting up an artificial benchmark on the amount of debt and saying the depositors have got to cough up their share set a very ugly and dangerous precedent.
All right, when we come back, we're going to look at where some of the money in Cyprus is actually going. A lot of it's going east. Stay with us. It's the France 24 debate.